My name is Daniel Mercer, and I had been out of work for nearly 3 months when I saw the job listing. It was buried at the bottom of a local classifieds page for job openings in Bangor, Maine. The posting was short and strangely vague. Night watchman. Needed for property on Route 9. Must be comfortable working alone. Above average pay. The number to call was a I dialed it that same evening. The voice on the other end was a man, deep and deliberate, who introduced himself as Richard Fallow. He told me he owned a small private warehouse facility 20 miles east of Bangor, surrounded by pine forest and set far back from the road. He said he had lost 2 guards in the past year, both of whom had quit without explanation. He claimed they could not handle the isolation. The pay was far more than anything I had seen for this kind of work, nearly double minimum wage. It was tempting to ask why he paid so much, but his voice had a weight to it, like he was choosing his words carefully, and I did not want to ruin my chances. I agreed to meet him the next day at the site. I arrived just before sunset. The property was hidden behind a wall of trees, and the driveway was nothing more than a single narrow lane of cracked asphalt that disappeared into the dark green of the forest. When I finally broke through the tree line, I saw a squat concrete structure with no windows and 2 heavy steel doors at the front. The place did not look like a storage facility at all. It looked like a bunker. Richard Fallow was waiting for me at the base of the steps. He was tall, thin, dressed in a plain gray coat, his pale face framed by a mess of unkempt brown hair streaked with white. He shook my hand, his grip surprisingly cold, and gestured for me to follow him inside. The air inside was stale, with a faint smell of dust and something faintly metallic. The interior was a single wide corridor lined with reinforced metal doors on both sides. At the far end sat a heavy oak desk, and behind it, a small bulletproof glass window that looked out onto the front steps. The lighting was dim and yellow, the kind that casts more shadow than light. Richard led me to the desk and slid a keyring toward me. There were 7 keys in total, each labeled with a strip of yellow tape and a number written in black ink. He also placed a stapled packet of paper beside it. I glanced at the first page. It was not an employee handbook. It was a list of rules. The first line read, "Follow each instruction exactly. Do not attempt to improvise." Beneath it were 10 numbered entries. Some were almost laughable in how bizarre they were. One read, "If you hear a sound like someone dragging chains across the floor, remain in your seat and close your eyes until it stops." Another said, "If you see a man wearing a long red scarf outside the front window after 1 a.m., do not look at him for more than 3 seconds." I looked up at Richard, expecting an explanation. His expression had not changed. He told me that the previous guards had failed to take the rules seriously. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "This building is not empty at night." I wanted to laugh it off, but the way he said it left no room for humor. He spoke as if he were delivering bad news to a terminal patient. He gave me a brief tour, pointing out the break room, the small restroom, and the locked door at the center of the left wall. That door, he said, led to the sublevel. I was not to open it under any circumstances. When the tour ended, he told me he would leave before nightfall. He would return at 6 a.m. sharp. He wished me luck, turned, and walked out into the fading daylight. I was alone. The first hour passed quietly enough. I settled into the desk chair, flipped through an old magazine someone had left in the drawer, and sipped from the thermos of coffee I had brought with me. The building was eerily silent, so much so that every small sound, my foot tapping the creak of the chair, seemed magnified. The overhead lights hummed faintly, their glow casting faint reflections across the polished floor. Around 9:30 p.m., I heard the first sound. It was faint at first, a low scraping like wood against concrete. It came from somewhere deep in the corridor. I froze, listening. The scraping grew louder. It was deliberate, unhurried, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor toward me. I swallowed and glanced at the packet of rules. There was nothing about scraping, no instruction, no warning. The sound stopped just short of the desk. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I leaned forward slightly, peering down the corridor, but saw nothing, just the dim light pooling in the hallway and the closed metal doors on either side. Then came the knock. It was soft, almost polite. 3 slow raps against the desk, but there was no one there. The air in the room seemed to thicken. I felt the tiny hairs on my arms rise. I could feel that I was being watched, though I could not say from where. I reached for my flashlight, the one Richard had left on the desk. I shined it down the hall. Sweeping it from side to side, the beam caught on something just at the edge of the light. A shape, hunched low, like a person crouched on all fours. It was gone before my eyes could adjust. I set the flashlight down, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of the shadows, but my body did not believe it. My hands were trembling. I looked at the rules again. That was when I noticed a line I had missed before. It was printed smaller than the rest. At the very bottom of the page, it read, "Some events will not be listed here. Use your judgment. But remember, this place is older than you know, older than I know." What the hell did that mean? It was close to midnight when I heard the second noise. This time it was the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps above me. I knew the roof was flat, with no second level. Yet the footsteps moved from one end of the building to the other, stopping directly above my head. The ceiling creaked under the weight of whatever was up there. Then something began to drag across the roof, a slow grinding sound that made my teeth ache. I stayed in the chair, gripping the arms, my eyes fixed on the front doors. If something came through them, I wanted to see it coming, but nothing did. Instead, I heard a faint tapping against the glass window behind me. I did not want to turn around. Every nerve in my body screamed against it. I turned. Face was pressed against the glass. It was pale, featureless, except for a mouth stretched into a smile, too wide for any human skull. The teeth were small and perfectly square, row upon row, like a shark, and it was smiling at me. The rules came flooding back into my mind. Do not look for more than 3 seconds. I tore my gaze away, staring at the floor, my pulse hammering in my ears. I counted in my head until the sound of the tapping stopped. When I finally glanced back, the window was empty. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought I could ride out the rest of the night. But then the sublevel door creaked. It was locked. I knew it was locked. Richard had said never to open it. But the sound of metal scraping against metal came from the other side, like someone sliding a key into the lock from within. I stared at the door, my mouth dry, my throat tight. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then something whispered my name from the other side. The whisper was soft, but every syllable carried a weight that settled in my chest. It was not a shout, not even loud enough to echo. Yet I heard it as clearly as if someone had leaned over my shoulder. Daniel, drawn out slowly, the last syllable tapering into something that sounded more like a hiss than a human breath. I stayed frozen in the chair, my hands gripping the armrests so tightly that my knuckles ached. My first thought was that Richard had returned unexpectedly, playing some cruel joke to test my resolve. But the voice did not sound like Richard. It was higher, brittle, as if every word were spoken through cracked glass. The door handle began to turn. Once, twice, then it stopped. I glanced down at the list of rules. Nothing about a voice calling my name. Nothing about the door trying to open. I wanted to stand and back away, but a strange heaviness kept me in the chair. Not fear alone, something else, like the air between me and the door had thickened into tar. The voice spoke again. "Let me in, Daniel." There was no urgency in it. It was calm, patient, certain that I would eventually obey. My eyes drifted to the keyring on the desk. One of the keys had no label. I knew instinctively that it belonged to that door. I also knew, with a certainty that felt older than thought, that using it would end me. A faint scratching sound began at the base of the door, as though nails were tracing slow circles into the wood. Not frantic scratching, measured, deliberate strokes. I realized then that the door was not made of wood at all. It was steel. The sound was metal on metal. I reached for my flashlight the moment my fingers touched it. The scratching stopped. Then came a sound I cannot compare to anything I had ever heard, a slow inhale from behind the door, but impossibly deep, like whatever was breathing had lungs the size of the entire sublevel. I stood, my legs stiff, and backed away until my calves pressed against the desk. The rules said nothing about this. I felt unprepared, vulnerable, trapped, in a place where knowledge was the only weapon and mine was incomplete. Then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered and went out. The darkness was absolute. I could not see my own hands in front of my face. I switched on the flashlight, the beam cutting a thin, trembling line through the void. The first thing I saw was not the door. It was the floor in front of me. A wet footprint. It was bare, human in shape, but distorted longer than normal. The toes stretched unnaturally forward. The wetness was thick and black under the flashlight. Not water, not anything I recognized. Another appeared beside it, then another, leading from the far end of the corridor toward me. I turned the beam down the hallway. The footprints continued into the darkness, but nothing was there. The sound of breathing returned, but this time it was not coming from the sublevel. It was behind me. I spun around. The flashlight beam passed over the glass window at the front of the building. Something was standing just beyond it. It was taller than the frame. So tall I could see only its chest and arms. They hung unnaturally long, the fingertips brushing the ground. The skin was the same pale, stretched texture as the face I had seen before, but where a mouth should have been, there was only a wide seam, stitched closed with thick black thread. It raised one hand and pressed it against the glass. The hand had too many fingers, each tipped with a nail that curved like a talon. The seam where its mouth should have been began to strain, the thread pulling tight, as if something inside were trying to force it open. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the wall. The flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam shaking across the desk and the door to the sublevel. A sound came from behind. The stitched seemed something like laughter, muffled and wet. Then the glass began to crack. Not a full shatter, just thin lines branching outward from where its hand pressed. Each crack spread like a living thing, crawling slowly toward the edges. Of the pain, I thought of running. I thought of opening the steel doors and bolting into the forest. Rules be damned. But the rules had implied that whatever was out there might be worse than what was in here. The thing at the window stopped laughing. It lowered its head slowly, like an animal considering prey. Then it stepped back into the dark. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. The cracks in the glass remained, spiderwebbing out in sharp patterns. The silence after its departure was thick enough to choke on. I sat down at the desk again, not because I felt safe there, but because standing made me feel exposed. I looked at the clock. It was 1:47 a.m. The rest of the night would not end quietly. The dragging chains came first. From somewhere above me, the sound wound its way through the air vents, rattling and grinding. Each pull followed by a pause long enough for me to wonder if it had stopped. It did not stop. I gripped the flashlight again, my eyes darting to the vent above the sublevel door. The sound was growing louder, closer, as though something heavy were being pulled through a narrow space. When it was directly above the door, the sound ceased. I stared at the vent, the beam, fixed on it, nothing. Then a single chain dropped through the grate, swaying gently. It was wet. The chain swayed for a moment, clinking softly in the silence. I could see drops of that black liquid falling from it onto the floor, spreading in slow, unnatural patterns like oil, finding its own path. Every instinct told me not to touch it. I backed away, until the desk was between me and the sublevel door. The chain twitched once, like something was tugging it from above. Then it retracted fast, vanishing back into the vent with a metallic rattle. The silence afterward felt wrong, not peaceful, but expectant. The clock on the wall ticked over to 2 o'clock a.m. At that moment, the air temperature dropped so sharply that my breath came out in pale clouds. The light from the flashlight seemed thinner, weaker, as though the darkness itself was pushing back. Then I heard the sound. It was faint at first, coming from beyond the steel doors at the front of the building. A slow, steady rhythm tap scrape, like someone walking barefoot on gravel. I shined the flashlight toward the glass. At first there was nothing. Then I saw her. A woman stood at the bottom of the steps outside. She was wearing a pale blue nightgown, soaked from the knees down, her bare feet planted on the concrete. Her hair was dark and clung to her face in wet strands. Even from here, I could see her lips moving, though no sound came through the glass. Her head tilted to one side, then the other, like she was trying to study me from different angles. The movement was too precise. Mechanical. The rules. I scrambled through the pages in my mind, searching for anything about her. Nothing. This was another unlisted event. She stepped forward, one foot on the bottom step, then another, her head tilted again, further this time, until it was almost horizontal. Her mouth was still moving. By the time she reached the top step, I could make out what she was saying. Daniel opened the door, not shouted, not even loud, just flat and cold, as though she were repeating a line she did not understand. I shook my head. I did not care if she could see the gesture. I was not letting her in. Her face twitched, not a change in expression, an actual twitch, the skin rippling in brief spasms, as though something underneath was moving. Her lips stopped moving. Then she raised both hands and pressed them to the glass. Her fingers were wrong, too thin, each tipped with a blackened nail that tapered to a sharp point. She began to drag them downward across the surface, leaving trails of condensation that streaked toward the frame. The glass vibrated under her touch. I felt it through the floor, a low hum that rattled my teeth. Then, without warning, the lights went out again. The flashlight beam caught her face one last time before total darkness swallowed everything. Her eyes were gone, 2 pits of blackness sinking into her skull. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the chair, trying to keep the beam steady on the doors. But when the lights flickered back on, she was gone. In her place was something else. A figure stood inside the building now, halfway down the corridor, toward me. It was the same height as the woman, but its shape was wrong, its limbs too long, its spine arched upward, the head tilted at an angle that looked painful. Its skin was slick, reflecting the dim light, like wet clay. I could not see its face. It was looking down at the floor, its long arms dangling at its sides. The rules screamed in my head. Do not engage. Do not speak. But before I could decide what to do, it moved. It did not walk, it lunged, closing the distance between us in a single unnatural stride. The desk slammed into my thighs as I fell back into the chair. The thing stopped inches from me, its head still hanging forward. Then, slowly, it lifted its face. There was nothing there. No mouth, no eyes, no features at all, just smooth, blank skin. It raised one hand and placed it on the desk, the weight making the wood groan. The skin of its palm split open, revealing a single bloodshot eye staring directly into mine. I could not move. The eye blinked once. Then the hand clenched into a fist, and the eye was gone. The thing straightened up, turning its head toward the sublevel door. It began to walk toward it, slow and deliberate, leaving a trail of wet footprints behind. When it reached the door, it stopped and looked back at me, or rather, it turned its blank face in my direction. Then it stepped through the steel, as if it were water, vanishing from sight. The clock read to 12 a.m. The rest of the night loomed like a weight on my chest. The wet footprints the faceless thing had left behind did not fade. They stayed there, black and shining in the dim light, the edges curling inward like the liquid was trying to sink into the floor. I kept glancing at the sublevel door, waiting for it to open or for another sound to leak through. Nothing came for a few minutes. I allowed myself to believe it was over, but that was when I noticed something on the desk. The packet of rules had changed. It was still there, still the same paper Richard had handed me hours earlier. But when I lifted it, the texture felt wrong. The pages were damp. The ink smeared in places as if it had been left out in the rain. I flipped to the first page. The list was no longer the same. Some rules were missing. Others had been replaced by things I had never read before. Rule 1 now said, if you hear the sound of glass breaking, do not check the window. The glass is not where you think it is. Rule 2 read, if you see a child in the hallway, it is not lost. Do not let it speak. The rule about the man with the grin was gone. The rule about the girl looking for her brother was gone too. I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself maybe I had remembered wrong. Maybe the panic had scrambled my memory. But deep down, I knew the truth, whatever was in here was rewriting the rules while I was still inside. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the sound of water dripping. It came in uneven intervals. Drip, pause, drip, drip. It was faint at first, but soon it became loud enough to echo through the corridor. I shined the flashlight down the hall. The light caught on something at the far end, just outside the range of full focus. The floor was wet. The dripping grew faster. Then I realized it was not water at all. It was coming from above. I tilted the beam upward, following the trail to the ceiling. Something hung there, pressed flat against the surface, like a lizard clinging to a wall. Its limbs were bent backward. Its head twisted around to face me. Its mouth opened wide, and the dripping grew louder. The black liquid poured from between its teeth, splattering onto the floor below. It began to crawl forward, its body folding in ways that made no sense. Each movement accompanied by a faint tearing sound as though its joints were splitting. I backed up toward the desk, keeping the flashlight trained on it. But the more light I gave it, the faster it moved. When it reached the midpoint of the hallway, the overhead lights went out again. I lost it in the darkness. I turned the flashlight left, right, back toward the desk. Nothing. Then I felt the weight above me. I didn't think. I threw myself sideways, hitting the floor hard, just as something slammed into the chair I had been standing under. The wood cracked, the chair collapsing under the impact. I scrambled to my feet, but the thing was gone again. In its place, standing at the far end of the hallway, was a child, a boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. Pale skin, dark hair, hanging in wet clumps over his forehead. He was barefoot, his pajamas soaked through. He stared at me without blinking. I remembered the new rules. Do not let it speak. The boy took one step toward me, then another. His mouth opened. I dropped the flashlight beam to the floor, not wanting to see his face, but I could still hear his voice. Daniel, it was the same brittle voice I had heard from behind the sublevel door. The same cadence, the same calm certainty. He took another step, and the sound of his bare feet on the wet floor made my skin crawl. I backed away until I was pressed against the steel front doors. The boy kept coming. I shut my eyes tight. I counted backward from 10. When I reached 1, the sound of footsteps stopped. I opened my eyes. The boy was gone, but the footprints he had left behind lead, not toward me, but away straight through the desk and toward the sublevel door. The lock on that door clicked once, twice. Then it swung open. Blackness filled the space beyond, so deep it looked solid. I could not see the stairs Richard had mentioned. I could not see anything at all. Something inside that darkness was moving. The movement in the blackness was not fast. It was slow, deliberate, as though whatever was inside wanted me to see it coming. A faint shape began to emerge, shifting in and out of view like it was not fully here yet. I stepped away from the open door. keeping the flashlight trained on the void. The beam did not penetrate, for it just seemed to vanish, swallowed before it could reach anything solid. Then I felt it, not a touch, but a pull. The air between me and the doorway seemed to grip me, invisible hands curling around my arms, my legs, my chest. I dug my heels into the floor, gripping the edge of the desk, but my shoes began to slide. The blackness did not draw me in with brute force. It tugged at me with a steady, patient pressure, as though it knew I would tire long before it would. My flashlight clattered to the floor, spinning once before coming to rest against the wall. The beam rolled across the hallway, then settled on the steel front doors. For a split second, I saw movement there, something huge pressing against the glass from the outside. Then the pull became irresistible. My grip broke, and I slid forward into the open sublevel. The air changed instantly. It was colder, heavier, filled with a smell that was both metallic and rotten. I reached out for the wall beside the stairs, but my hand found nothing. There were no stairs, no floor beneath my feet. I was falling. The blackness was not a room, it was a drop. The air whipped past me, and yet I could not hear my own breath. The only sound was a low hum, like a generator buried miles below the earth. I hit the ground without pain. The impact made no sound. When I looked around, the flashlight was still in my hand. Its beam now stretched farther, but what it revealed made no sense. The walls were too far apart to belong to the building I had entered. They curved upward like the inside of a massive cylinder, disappearing into a fog that glowed faintly red. The floor was wet under my shoes, and every step sent ripples across it, as though I were walking on shallow water. Shapes moved in the fog, not close enough to see clearly, but their silhouettes were tall, thin, and bent at strange angles. They moved in slow arcs, never crossing paths, their heads tilted down, as if studying the ground. I turned in place, searching for stairs or any sign of an exit. That was when I saw the door. It was freestanding in the middle of the water, no frame, no wall around it, just a tall wooden door, painted deep red. A key was stuck in its lock, turning slowly on its own. Something splashed in the water behind me. Not the slow ripple of my own movement. This was heavy, deliberate, and close. I turned, raising the flashlight. The beam caught a figure no more than 20 feet away. It was the boy again, but now his skin was gray, his eyes gone completely white. His mouth hung open, the jaw dislocated, and from it came a sound like a radio caught between stations. He began to walk toward me, each step sending thick black liquid spreading outward from his feet. The water beneath me began to darken too, the ripples slowing as if the liquid were turning to tar. I backed toward the red door. The key in its lock spun faster now, rattling against the wood. The boy's pace quickened. The static in his voice turned into words, broken and stretched, but unmistakable. "You are not supposed to be." Here I reached the door and grabbed the key. The moment my fingers touched it, the boy stopped moving. The shapes in the fog turned toward me in unison. I twisted the key. The lock clicked, the water beneath. My feet surged upward in a wave, pulling me backward through the doorway. For an instant, there was only cold. Then I was standing in the security office again, my flashlight still in my hand, the steel sublevel door shut tight. But something was wrong. The desk was gone. The walls were bare concrete, wet and covered in deep scratches, and the clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Time had gone backward. The tick of the clock was too slow, not broken, just wrong. Each second stretched, the sound thick and deliberate. My eyes stayed fixed on the numbers. 11:47, not moving. I stepped toward the clock, meaning to take it down, but halfway there I noticed the air. It felt thicker, like moving through warm water. Every breath was an effort, and my footsteps made no echo. I turned back toward the steel doors, thinking about leaving, but they were no longer steel. They were now made of wood, rotted, splintered, and swollen, as though they had been left in rain for years. Black stains spread from the base, seeping outward like mold growing in fast motion. I raised my flashlight, and the beam caught movement along the wall. The concrete was flexing, not crumbling or cracking, flexing. Something beneath the surface was pressing outward, shaping the wall like skin stretched over bone. I gripped the flashlight tighter. Then the clock ticked. 11:48. The sound was loud enough to make my ears ring. I stumbled back, and when my eyes adjusted, the room had changed again. The desk was back, but it was wrong, tilted at an angle, as though the floor beneath it had shifted. The drawers were open, spilling papers onto the ground. The rule sheet was there, but now it was blank except for a single sentence written in black ink at the very top. "There is no outside anymore." I stood frozen, reading the words again and again, hoping I was imagining them. Then the sound of glass breaking snapped my head toward the front doors. The glass was still intact, but the sound came again, sharper this time, and it was coming from the ceiling. I pointed the flashlight upward. What I saw did not belong in a ceiling. A window was set into the concrete above me, like a skylight, except it was tilted at a strange angle, as though gravity in that space obeyed a different rule. Through it, I could see the storage units from above, stretched and distorted, their doors taller than they should be. Something moved across the glass, dragging its hands over it. The nails left trails, the same black residue as before. It bent down, pressing its face against the window. A mouth formed in the glass itself, wide and grinning, teeth pressing outward until they cracked the pane. The sound of shattering filled the air again. A single piece of glass fell, but instead of hitting the floor, it hung there in midair, rotating slowly. The reflection in it was not me. It was the boy, standing exactly where I was, staring out from my own body. I stepped back, and the reflection smiled. Not my smile, his. The glass drifted toward me. Faster now. I swung the flashlight at it, but the beam bent away, as if the glass repelled light. It touched my chest and I was no longer in the office. I stood in the main hallway again, but every storage unit door was open. Inside each one was a person. They were standing, unmoving, their eyes open but unblinking. Some were missing legs, faces, yet they did not bleed. They all turned toward me in unison. Not their heads, their whole bodies rotated smoothly. Silently. One stepped forward, a man with no lower jaw. His voice came from somewhere deep in his chest, hollow and distant. "You were supposed to replace him." The others began to step forward too, not walking, gliding, the water beneath their feet rippling outward toward mine. I turned and ran. The hallway was longer now, stretching far beyond where the doors to the outside should be. The air grew colder with each step, until I could see my breath again. Somewhere behind me, the sound of hundreds of footsteps followed, all perfectly in sync. I didn't look back, not until the clock struck again. 11:47. I was back in the office. The desk was upright. The steel doors were normal. The rules sheet lay on the desk, exactly as it had been when I first arrived. Only one difference. Rule number 1. Now read. Do not trust the time. I stared at the new rule until my vision blurred. Do not trust the time. The clock still read 11:47, but the second hand wasn't moving. If the time was meaningless, then maybe the rules themselves were lies. I told myself the truth was somewhere in the chaos, and the only way to find it was to push back. The first opportunity came sooner than I thought. A faint scratching echoed from the far right storage unit, the same spot the old rules had warned me about. The instructions had said to tap the nightstick 3 times and stay silent. Instead, I walked straight to the door and knocked hard with my fist. The scratching stopped. A pause. Then a voice spoke from the other side. It wasn't human. The sound was too deep, too resonant, like it was vibrating the air in my lungs. Finally, the lock on the unit clicked. The door rolled upward on its own, slow at first, then faster until it slammed into the ceiling. Inside was darkness deeper than any shadow I'd seen. Then two pale hands emerged, gripping the frame. They were long, with too many knuckles, and the skin shifted like something was moving beneath it. A face appeared between them, not monstrous human, a man, maybe in his 30s, with black hair plastered to his skull and eyes that caught the light like wet stones. "You opened it," he said. "The rules are theirs, not mine." Before I could move, he stepped out. Water pooled around his bare feet, spreading across the floor toward me, but he didn't come closer. "They told you not to break them," he said, glancing toward the ceiling as though something was listening. "But break enough, and you might find the door out." I wanted to ask what he meant, but the lights flickered when they came back. He was gone. Only the wet footprints remained, leading back into the dark unit, which was now sealed shut again. I felt my pulse quicken. If breaking rules could bring allies, maybe I could force the building to show me its exits. The next test came at exactly midnight, at least according to the unmoving clock. The sound of a girl crying drifted from the forest outside, faint but growing clearer. The rules had said never to investigate, so I went to the steel doors, unlocked them, and stepped outside. The air was thick with mist. The forest loomed at the edge of the parking lot, black shapes twisting in the fog. The crying stopped as soon as I took my third step forward. Then something began to run toward me. Not a percento fast, it burst from the mist on all fours. Its body human, but its head stretched long, jaw hanging open so wide I could see the back of its throat. I turned to run, but it skidded to a halt just feet from me, head jerking side to side. Its voice was like static on a dead channel. "Not for you, not yet," bolted past me, through the steel doors, without touching them, vanishing into the building. The mist cleared instantly. The forest was gone. In its place stretched a hallway inside the building, but tilted, as though it had been pulled up from the ground and set against the sky. Doors lined the walls, each marked with a number that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. I stepped inside. The door behind me shut. The hallway floor was soft under my feet, not carpet, something organic. It flexed when I stepped, the pulsing sinking to my heartbeat. The air was warmer here, carrying a faint smell like rust and wet earth. I stopped at the first door. Number 1, no handle, no handle dot, only a single word carved in two. The wood trade dot from behind me. The sound of footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, echoing off the walls in a way that made it impossible to tell the distance. I reached for the next door, number 2, and it swung open. Inside was the man from the storage unit. He was sitting in a chair, smiling faintly. "You have to keep going," he said. "Break enough, and it will let you leave." Before I could ask, the footsteps stopped right behind me. I turned. The hallway was empty, but the floor beneath my feet had stopped pulsing. The stillness in the floor made my skin crawl. It felt like holding your breath too long, the air waiting to burst. I stepped backward, toward the first door, but the wood had changed. Now the carved word trade was gone. Instead, written in dripping red letters, was a new sentence. Rule 1, give it your eyes. The ink was fresh. It ran down the grain in thick lines, dripping onto the soft floor, where it sizzled faintly. I did not touch it, but I could feel the heat radiating off the letters. A paper slid under my shoe. I bent to pick it up. It was the rule sheet from the desk. Every line was different. Rule 1, give it your eyes. Rule 2, let the crying in. Rule 3, follow the boy into the sub-level. Rule 4, if you see the smiling man, hold his hand. Rule 5, destroy the clock. The paper smelled faintly of smoke, like it had been pulled from a fire. The man from the storage unit appeared at the far end of the hallway. His voice carried without him moving his mouth. They will try to make you break yourself. I wanted to ask how I was supposed to tell the difference between the real rules and the fakes. But he was gone again, replaced by the boy. His white eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and he smiled for the first time. "Follow me," he said, then turned and began walking toward the sub-level. The fake rules told me to follow him, which meant I should not. But the real rules had changed before, hadn't they? What if this was one of those moments where breaking the rule meant losing the chance to escape? I stood frozen, the boy pausing halfway down the hall. When I didn't move, his head rotated all the way around without his body turning. "It's waiting," he said, his voice echoing from the walls instead of his mouth. "It's hungry." The soft floor pulsed again under my feet, but not with my heartbeat this time, faster, irregular, like it belonged to something else entirely. From the walls, thin cracks began to open, each one leaking a slow stream of dark liquid. The boy started walking again, against every instinct. I followed. The sublevel door was open before we reached it. Inside was no darkness this time, just a blinding white light, so bright it made my eyes ache. I shielded my face, but the boy walked straight in. Something reached out from the light, a pale hand with long fingers. It hovered in the air, palm up, waiting. The first fake rule burned in my mind. "Give it your eyes." I stepped back. The boy tilted his head, frowning. "If you do not give it, we'll take." The light intensified until the air felt hot against my skin. Then the hand moved faster than I could react, gripping my jaw in a cold, steel-like grip. Pain exploded across my face as a pressure built behind my eyes. I tore free, stumbling backward into the hallway. The light vanished. The sublevel door slammed shut. The hallway was empty again. No boy, no man, no fake rules on the door. Only the paper in my hand remained, but now the text was smeared into illegible streaks. The clock chimed once. I was back in the office. Las 11:47. The desk drawer was open. The original rules inside. No sign of the fake sheet. Only one new line added at the bottom, written in that same dripping red ink. "You should have given them." The air was still heavy when I stepped away from the desk. My legs felt weak, as if the grip from that pale hand had drained something out of me. The clock on the wall gave one slow, heavy tick. The lights flickered when they came back. The office was gone. I stood in a hallway I knew too well. The faded wallpaper, the scuffed wooden floor, the smell of dust and lemon cleaner. This was the house I grew up in. Down the hall to the right would be my bedroom. To the left, the kitchen, where my mother used to hum while cooking. Only, my childhood home had been torn down years ago. I took one step forward, and the floorboards creaked exactly the way they had when I was a boy, the sound triggering a deep, unsteady pull in my chest. It felt like memory, but thicker, heavier, like something was forcing me to remember. The desk was gone. The rules were gone. The clock was gone. Somewhere, faintly, I heard my mother's voice calling my name. "Daniel, come in here a moment." It came from the kitchen. I moved slowly, each step making the floor groan under my weight. The smell of cooking grew stronger. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy, the kind of meals she made on special nights. I stepped into the kitchen and froze. She was there, not a ghost, not a shadow. Warm, alive. She turned to face me, smiling in a way I had not seen since before she died. "You look tired," she said. "Sit down." On the table were 2 plates, steam curling up from the food. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Something deep inside me screamed to leave, but my legs carried me forward, lowering me into the chair. She sat across from me, folding her hands. "You don't have to work tonight," she said. "You can stay here." I looked at the plate. The steam carried the scent of my favorite meal from childhood. But when I reached for the fork, the chicken twitched. A small, jerking movement, like a muscle spasm. I dropped the fork. She didn't blink. "Eat, Daniel." Her voice was softer now, but layered 2, 3 maybe more tones, speaking in perfect unison. I pushed the plate away, and her smile faltered. You never do what you're told. The walls around us groaned, the wallpaper tearing itself in long strips. Beneath it was not wood or plaster, but wet, pulsing flesh. The floor softened under my shoes, the boards bending like muscle and sinew. She stood, her skin rippled, as though something underneath was shifting position. Her eyes darkened until they were bottomless pits, and her mouth opened wider than her face should allow. From that mouth came a sound. I recognized instantly the static-choked voice of the boy. Follow me, Daniel. The kitchen doorway was gone, replaced by the steel sublevel doors. They were open, but the space beyond them was not the blinding white light from before. It was my childhood bedroom, perfectly intact, bathed in a warm golden glow. I backed away, but the chair behind me gripped my legs, holding me in place. The walls pulsed faster, the sound like 1,000 heartbeats thudding in my skull. Then the smell of the food changed, rot, thick, wet, undeniable. I kicked the chair away and bolted through the steel doors into my bedroom. The moment I stepped inside, the door slammed shut, the room stretched around me like rubber, the corners pulling away until the walls melted into the same endless hallway from before. The golden glow faded to red dot at the far end. The man from the storage unit stood waiting. This is the last part, he said. The choice will not look like a choice. Before I could speak, the floor beneath me dropped. I fell into darkness. The fall had no wind, no sense of speed, just a slow, sickening feeling of my stomach twisting as the blackness stretched around me. When I hit the ground, it was not with pain, but with silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I stood in a circular chamber. The walls were not stone or metal, they were made of the same wet, flexing material I had seen behind the wallpaper. Veins pulsed through it, pumping a dark liquid toward the floor, where it pooled in slow, thick ripples. In the center of the room was the clock. Not the one from the office, this was massive. Its face taller than I was, its hands frozen at 11:47. The second hand trembled, but never moved. The man from the storage unit was there. So was the boy. They stood on opposite sides of the clock, both watching me. The man spoke first. It was built to keep us here. The boy's voice followed, cold and precise. It eats what breaks. The rules, it keeps what follows them. I stepped closer to the clock. The glass face was cracked in the center, and through the fissure I could see movement shapes crawling just beneath the surface, pressing against it like larvae inside an egg. The man's eyes fixed on me. The last rule was never written, because if you know it, you can leave. The boy's grin widened, but only if you are willing to take someone's place. The chamber shuddered from the walls. Pale arms began to emerge, hundreds of them, clawing toward me. Some grabbed the man, some reached for the boy, some went for me. The man stepped forward, ripping free of the hands. If you stay, you will forget who you are until you are part of it. If you leave, someone else must stay. The boy tilted his head, choosed that the arms gripped tighter, pulling me toward the walls. I looked at the man, his expression calm, almost relieved. I looked at the boy, his grin like a knife. The clock ticked once, las 11:48. I lunged for the man, shoving him backward toward the wall. His eyes widened, not in fear, but in understanding as the arms pulled him into the flesh. The boy began to laugh. The clock face shattered. Light poured out, not white, not gold, but something without a color. I could name it. Swallowed me whole. When I opened my eyes, I was outside. The storage building stood in front of me. Steel doors shut tight. The forest behind it was silent. My car was parked exactly where I'd left it. I ran for it, climbed in, and drove until the building was gone from the mirror. My phone lit up with messages, calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. It wasn't until I pulled into my driveway hours later that I saw it. On my passenger seat lay the rules sheet. Only one line was written on it now. Rule 1. Replace yourself before the clock moves. And from somewhere deep in the night behind me, I heard the sound of footsteps, fast coming closer.